Welcome, everybody. I'm Julie Kratz. I'll be your host today, talking about diversity and inclusion training. Our intent is that you walk away with some ideas, some best practices, and this is a free-for-all questions. Ask me anything as you're working through your diversity journey. There is no silly question. So I just ask that everyone's respectful and be prepared to interact and engage with us. I'm joined by two members of my team. Michelle and Catherine are there on video if you just want to do a quick wave. They'll be watching the chat and also available to answer any questions that you have. A bit about me, if you haven't met me before, I'm a speaker, trainer, and author focused on workplace inclusion. I host a few podcasts on this subject and really passionate about having this conversation, not just in the workplace, but in all spheres of our life. And as a mom of three girls, albeit white girls here in the United States, I just recognize the challenges that they are experiencing and will experience as a result of their gender identity. And when you think about gender equality, racial equality, all the different dimensions of diversity, we are centuries away from that type of equity being achieved. And so that's why I do what I do. I know this work is a journey, it's not a destination, but if I can be a small piece of positive change, then that's really why I get up in the morning and continue to do this work. The agenda for us, we're just going to have about 40 minutes together. So we know people are Zoom fatigued, meeting fatigue. That's part of why we created this program and have this opportunity for learning today. Just to give a quick overview on why our approach to DEI. There's lots of different, consultants, trainers out there. We've been at this for 7 years, and I was a people leader in corporate America for 12 years before that. So I remember what it was like. DEI, of course, has evolved over the 7 years I've been in business doing this. But I have found some proven tools that have really had a lasting impact on organizations that I'd love to share with you. And that's what we'll talk about, just an overview and some best practices and tools to consider as a part of your journey in DEI. And then I'd love for everybody just to pick one thing they're taking away from the conversation, one thing you can take action on. It's always helpful, I think, in these sessions to have it have an impact in your life. It's 45 minutes of your day. We want you to have a positive impact. So first question we have for you, we'll do a couple polls, lots of opportunities to participate today. What theme, if you had to pick one of these themes or pick other, we just ask that you chat your responses so we can learn from you. What are the themes your organization is focused on? So most focused on as you think about now going into 2022. And we'll give you about 30 more seconds to vote. See, about half the folks have voted. We'd love to hear from everybody here. Lots of different answers coming in. So keep them coming. Got 17 of the 25 so far. Bump it up. We'll give you about 10 more seconds. So 10, 9, countdown. Thank you. Culture and include safety. Yeah, Shalise, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that perspective. I was a former safety manager in corporate America. And honestly, a lot of the conversations we're having around DEI reminds me of 20 years ago, the conversations we were having around safety. It's important. My organization said no job is too important that we can't do it safely. I think where we're at with DEI is we're saying it's important, but our actions sometimes aren't fully matching that. So sharing results now, so you can see what your peers had to say. Culture is about 52%. So that looked like the front runner here. It's interesting, when I did this last fall on LinkedIn, I had a few hundred people respond and they picked accountability. So kind of a shift here, at least with the, a couple dozen that we had weigh in on this. So interesting. And if anyone has other themes, these are just 4 that we picked that we're hearing a lot from our clients. But culture, we are in a very competitive talent place right now. I don't have any clients that are fully staffed right now or don't worry about keeping and retaining their best talent, especially diverse and inclusive talent. So that is, I think, a real differentiator, is having an inclusive culture where people want to be, right? They don't feel forced or have to be or should be. So we built an online bite-sized DEI training program because we actually built this a few years ago. I think 2019, we originally built this, and it was based on my book, Lead Like an Ally. Well, fast forward to today, of course, there's been so much conversation around diversity. So we updated all of the content. And at the same time, we were hearing last year, we've got virtual meeting fatigue. I can't handle another Zoom meeting. I want to learn about DEI, but does it have to be in a live training? Do I have to learn about it? Do I have to speak about it when I'm not even comfortable fully having learned about it myself? Lots of priorities that folks are trying to manage. We do a lot of listening sessions with our clients, and people are saying, I'm burnt out. I have to do this in my free time or my family time, and it's affecting my mental health. And there's a real compassion fatigue in the conversation too. We want to do better and meet people where they're at. And we want psychological safety, but how do I do that? Right. And especially for people leaders, we're seeing that as a huge gap is everyone's telling me I need to be inclusive, but I don't even really know what that means or how to do it. Like, what am I, just tell me what to do. So essentially that's why we built this bite-sized virtual training program. And I'll share what's all involved in it. But of course, there's this great resignation thing also hanging out there. So we see it as an opportunity to educate folks, engage folks, have a more inclusive workplace culture based on key skills that we know folks need to learn about. So I'm going to keep watching the chat here. Okay, okay, all right, just making sure there weren't any audio issues. Catherine, let me know if anything's breaking up on your end. So we built this. So essentially last summer, as I was, processing where we were at with our previously like an ally program and what we were hearing from clients in 2021 was overwhelmingly, I need to make it personal for folks. So we start the program with building what we call your ally plan. And when we say ally, it just simply means to show up for somebody different than you. Okay. We have people actually create their own definition of what that means because active allyship is a key component that we speak to, not the performative, read my book, listen to this podcast, watch this program. You have to actually take action with it. So each learning bullet point that you're seeing here is about a 5-minute video with a reinforced reflection activity. And it guides people through individual to systemic change. So you can see some of the core topics, of course, empathy, vulnerability, racism, gender, showing up as an ally, having this, engaging team meetings, addressing bias, LGBTQ, and more. All of these are hot topics in most workplaces. And we're finding people are very hungry for these tools. But again, they don't necessarily want to sit through a big, long training. And we're still in a place where most folks aren't convening in person to have a deep dive experience into these topics. So our idea was, how do we make it super simple and super bite-sized? So I just want to give you a quick overview of each one of these sections. And we'd love to hear from you how this is resonating with you or what training you're providing or other subjects you're interested in, because it was hard to pick 30 topics. Like, it was very difficult because we have a full array of topics that we've built over the years based on client demand. And these, in my mind, I felt like is what people needed for their own individual learning journey. And we encourage folks to take the program together and to share, have an accountability partner, a peer that you can share with as well. So the first piece is really crafting your why. Like, if we don't have a why for this, you're not going to keep showing up. It's hard. It's hard to keep reading these books, and especially as a white person doing this work, continually to having to remind myself of the privilege that I have because of my skin color and the deep racial history that I wasn't taught in school, that I'm having to educate myself on now. And so that why is really important. That's super personal for folks. But having a vision, knowing where you want to show up, how do you want to show up, is a really important question that people don't think about. And then they show up and they bumble and stumble, which mistakes are a part of any learning process, especially with DEI, but how to proactively educate folks so they don't have to make as many mistakes, because it can be painful and folks can withdraw from the conversation when they experience that kind of pain. And I have a plan for success. And then what's beautiful about it is it's really choose your own adventure. So folks can go into the second module and dive into empathy, vulnerability, and trust, or they could fast forward and advance to a topic that they're most interested in, like leaning into candid conversations. We talk about it as kind of a 3-step process. You need to make sure that you define the meeting's purpose, have a good discussion, and decide at the end. We're seeing a lot of people really struggling, especially with the defining the purpose of our meeting is this. And how to give and receive feedback as allies. If we care about each other, we're going to share things that, may not be fully pleasant or comfortable. And sometimes, despite our best intentions, we might hold back and not share things, especially if it's somebody different than me. And the message is that you don't care enough about the person to help them be better. And that's not at all the intent. So we talk a lot about intent versus impact. That's a popular tool and the DEI toolkit, as well as coaching. How do you coach others on your team? What does being a coach look like? When might someone benefit from coaching? And mentorship and sponsorship and advocacy are key pieces. We talk about it as an umbrella. And so we have different spokes that you can pick from. There's no one size fits all ally. It depends on your skill set, and also depends on what the person's looking for help or support on. It's really meant to be a two-way conversation, and maybe a one-to-many conversation for people leaders and folks in high-level roles. Talk about, how do I want to show up? Am I a good mentor? Am I in rooms where people are not? Could I be a sponsor for people different than me? Or am I advocating, for people like me? Because a lot of us have affinity bias, which means we prefer we gravitate towards people that look like us, that have similar backgrounds to us, that we feel comfortable with, right? And one of the exercises we have folks do is just think about your network. And just write down, I have people pull up their phone and look through their text messages or calendar entries or phone log, wherever, whatever data you can find. Are people in your network that you choose to spend time with like you? And if you're like me, when I first started on this DEI journey many years ago, my network was like me. I was filled with white women, business owners that were mothers. And, it's kind of like holding up the mirror to somebody that's just like me. And the key learning objective we unpack a lot in the course is that you don't learn as much from people like you. You reinforce what you already know from people like you. And that's why we feel comfortable, because it takes extra effort in our brain to unlearn and learn new things. And that's what allyship's all about. It's that comfort with discomfort is often how we frame that, is getting comfortable being a bit uncomfortable, because you're going to face new situations. But as a result of that, you're going to learn and grow. And in fact, one of the key allyship traits that we talk about is listening, which people usually say they're good listeners. No one wants to think they're a bad listener. But we overestimate our ability to listen. And when you really think about some key things, like, do you pause and let awkward silences happen? Do you play back verbatim what someone said? People quickly realize, like, oh, I'm not doing those things as much as I could. And that's what makes an inclusive leader, is someone that gives space, right? That psychological safety, being intentional with our questions, really asking thoughtful questions of our team, and managing difficult situations. When I was a people leader in corporate America, I was very conflict averse. I didn't have a lot of these skill sets. I didn't have a lot of these tools. No one taught me how to manage conflict. And so the feedback I'd get often from my team is that I just kind of brushed it under the rug, hoping it would get better. And guess what? It didn't. It got worse. And that's where we're at. I think, especially in a hybrid work environment, many folks are dodging things where you might have run into someone in the hallway before, or had to see them face to face in a meeting. It's a little different hiding behind a computer screen sometimes. And so inclusive leaders look for conflict and mine it versus hide from it. Kind of the back half of the course, and feel free to plop in any questions you're seeing here in the chat. I do want to hear from you. We'll have a poll here in a few minutes just to kind of gauge what subjects are resonating with you. We, of course, unconscious bias is a hot subject, hot topic. Many organizations have had a base level unconscious bias course. If your organization hasn't, we kind of meet people where they're at with just explaining the basics of the science behind bias. A lot of training programs miss that. I had the opportunity to get certified from the Cultural Intelligence Center a few years ago, and we could actually do training in person, which was lovely. But they talk a lot about the neuroscience, and I admittedly didn't have an appreciation for neuroscience before going through that lesson myself. But so much of our behavior is based on how our brain works, and when you understand it's like our computer of our body, it becomes pretty obvious why people say and do things that aren't inclusive or things that are inclusive. And so you really have to unpack your lived experiences, your stereotypes, and everyone has those biases, right? I mean, a lot of people say that everyone has bias. It's just how it shows up. Well, if you're self-aware of it, then you can manage and look out for microaggressions that others might be experiencing and kind of flag that. You can be an advocate, and not an upstander, not a bystander. If you see something, say something as an ally. And we talk about the importance of calling on people or calling them in. What's cool about each subject is we have resources, optional resources if you want to dig in. So for example, call people in is a great term that we first saw coined by Loretta J. Ross. She has a TED Talk on the importance of not calling people out, but calling them in. So it reinforces the content. So if folks want to hear from diverse perspectives and not just, a white woman talking about DEI, we bring in a treasure trove of proven, vetted resources that can amplify the message and provide a different alternative perspective as well, because that perspective taking is so important in DEI. We also do some deep dives. So the big three, and we have content on disabilities and other dimensions of difference as well. But the big three that we get asked, called upon by a lot of our clients is gender, race, and LGBTQ. So that's the reason we picked the three, although we could definitely take some deep dives into other subjects. It just became kind of how much content is enough, because people told us, I want content, but I don't want too much. So that's why we chose those subjects. And we leveraged Joan C. Williams' research on gender bias around the tightrope and the maternal wall and the tug of war and prove it again biases. So again, a proven framework here that has other optional tools from her, including her book about the subject, that really does a nice job of distilling like really things that are hard to see. And when we have labels for things, it becomes really much easier to earmark it and to look out for it and watch it out in your own behavior as well. And thanks, Catherine, for sharing that talk in the chat. So that's just one example of the kind of tools that we're bringing in from other thought partners as well, because we don't have all the answers. We really look at this as a repository of information collected from a lot of folks in this space. Just a couple more subjects, and I want to hear from you. Racism, of course, very important central topic. And we do talk about this more from the perspective of white folks, because people of color have lived the experiences. They understand the microaggressions that they have faced themselves or seen others in their community face. So we talk about your role in the system, that most of us did not build the systems that suppress folks and keep, things like voting to education to housing with different lived experiences of folks. So accepting that I didn't participate in building the system, but I am benefiting from it, right? And that's a huge learning point, especially for folks that identify as white, and understanding your areas of privilege. And we talk about that very broadly across a lot of dimensions of difference, but of course, white privilege is a very real thing. And how do you signal to others that you want to be an ally? It's not about self-proclamation. So this is where allyship goes really wrong, in addition to performative allyship, is when I self-proclaim that I'm an ally. So I'm Julie, I'm an ally. I would never say that, because it's about I'm committed to being an ally. I'm signaling to others of my own behavior. If you're doing it, you shouldn't have to say you're doing it. It's kind of like when someone says they're an expert, I'm like, if you are, then we should see that you're an expert through the things you're sharing and doing. Allyship is very much the same way. It has to be demonstrated and it has to be active, right? People are very tired of talk and they want real action. And so these give people the action steps to take. Research what you don't know. Don't ask people that are already marginalized to explain the experiences that they've had of being marginalized. That's not fair. And with LGBTQ plus, you can Google. We share very reputable resources that are well vetted in our toolkit for the course. But you can Google a lot of this. People will say, well, what does the acronym stand for? Like, seriously, Google it, right? You should be able to find that out with a reputable source. Now, you don't want to just trust any source for a complex subject, but GLSEN and some other of our trusted resources really have great information. Things like pronouns is still like a very important topic inside organizations. Still very few people I see actively, proactively sharing their pronouns. And then just embracing gender as a spectrum as well. And how, 50% of folks are closeted in the workplace. workplace, how can you facilitate being out and being able to talk about an important part of your personal life as an ally without being too intrusive? Because our personal and professional lives were never separate, but they've never been more blurred, right? And so how do we ask work appropriate questions as well, which has been a big hot topic as of late. All right, last but not least is systemic change. And I think this is what was really missing when we did the first version of our course. We talked about individual actions. We're hoping people would just feel compelled to drive systemic change. People need tools, they need information. And so we talk about it from a strategy perspective, a measurement perspective, as well as something that's emerging a lot is a lot of folks have incorporated diversity and inclusion language into their employee engagement survey. But that's done once a year, every other year, right? How are we collecting feedback on a regular basis? Things like exit interviews, things like pulse surveys. How do we fold in and make sure that we're staying active on the aspects and perceptions of DEI real time as well? So there's some best practices that we encourage, and this program is for anyone. So ideally, people leaders would be well versed in these subjects, but certainly individual contributors, C-suite leaders have went through the program. We really design it to be an individual tailored experience so that you can choose your own adventure and learn about what you want to learn and build your own path. So of the 10 that we were sharing, I'm just kind of curious as I buzzed through that, and I know I went through that really quick. That's about 2.5 hours of content that I just shared in 15 minutes. But I'd love to know what's resonating. If anyone wants to come on live and share, or other topics that you didn't see here. We have, again, a whole library of other topics, but it might be helpful just to share if you're seeing other things as well. Chris, thanks for sharing. I believe many people ask some of these researchable questions as a way to engage and be a part of the conversation. What's a good approach to being involved in the conversation without offending or annoying? Yeah, I think just leading with like, hey, I saw an article on this. So show that if I have already done my research, say, hey, I saw this, and I'll give you an example. LGBTQ. There was a newsletter this week that I prescribed to, Anti-Racism Daily, which is Nicole Cardoza does an amazing job at that newsletter. I learn something literally every day. So it's one of the resources we send people to in the course. Anyway, all this to say, she did an article this week on Disney and with Encanto, which I just finally watched last night. Beautiful film. And she talked about how, unfortunately, in past Disney movies, a lot of villains were depicted as LGBTQ. And I had never thought about it, right? And so I was so curious after reading and seeing all the examples of pretty obvious, the stereotype that had been at play. And so I shared it with one of my friends that identifies as queer. And I said, oh my gosh, check out this paragraph. I had never thought about that. And she responded with like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, this is a real thing. Thanks for sharing with me. And so finding a way to say, like, not put the burden of the other person to educate you, and not also to claim that I know everything because I read this article. It's a very fine line as an ally, showing up, not having all the answers, being curious to learn, but also being equipped with enough information so that I'm not putting the ownership on the other person to educate me. And if you compare notes with a person of color, it's been exhausting, the questions that they've been asked by white people to explain things to them that you shouldn't have to explain it. There's tons of content out there to at least get your basic level of knowledge. But it is important to hear the perspective of folks that are affected by it too, and not assume you know everything. So again, it's very nuanced. Rebecca had unconscious bias and gender bias. Scott had drive systemic change. Shalise had ageism is becoming an issue. I just heard that in a focus group I was leading this morning. That's so interesting. Age is actually, according to the implicit association test through Harvard, age, most folks, I think it's like 96% of folks have age bias, and most of us prefer young to older. We make a lot of assumptions, especially I work a lot in the tech industry. We make a lot of assumptions about abilities based on age. Yeah, that's a good one. It didn't make it into the program, but I definitely have a lot of thoughts on that one. LS, yeah, many in my organization have expressed interest, but similar to what you found, folks are tired and worn out and they want content and training without. Yeah, and it's this balance. I want content and training, but I don't have to do too much work. Well, it is going to take some work. The beauty, at least what we really tried to do with this program is, again, is it's roughly 2.5 hours of content. It's 5 minute videos. And so we tell our clients, could you set the expectation that people go through this in 90 days or 6 months or 9 months, whatever it is, and set an expectation that you'll spend an hour a month going through a program. I mean, that to me, if it's important to your organization, an hour a month doesn't feel like a lot of time. The and then if people are more curious and have more time, they can dive much deeper into the tools and the reflection exercises that we have. So there's no shortage of content. And thanks, Catherine, for sharing that anti-racism daily newsletter. We highly recommend it. We're coming on the heels of Black History Month, which should be celebrated all year. But if you want to be committed to learning, they have a 28-day challenge that you can actually donate to be a part of or just participate. We chose to donate, and you can learn about a topic specifically in Black history, little known facts every day. So I love bite-sized learning. I think that's really where we're at from a learning and development perspective. I've been in a corporate learning for the last 15 years or so, and bite-size was always popular, but I think almost now it's like the only way we're reaching people because burnout and the ability to shop around in positions is just so prevalent. To not have an inclusive workplace, we really risk being irrelevant to our employees as well as to our customers. A couple more things I wanted to share with you, and by all means, ask me anything. The part of the program that we have is we really intentionally built an interactive PDF workbook. So folks can go in there, type directly your responses, and then they're hyperlinked to additional resources. So you can just see an example. We cover psychological safety, which of course is a very interesting topic right now in corporate spaces. And you can see how there's a deeper dive for reflection. We copy in the exact slides so that people can see some of the ideas real time there. And then we vetted a lot of research. There's a lot of resources out there that are not fully proven or don't have the data, the expertise behind it. So I think that's just a watch out to find good vetted topics. And we have a lot of our own content hyperlinked there, as well as partners that we trust. And then the last thing I wanted to cover is that we have our own learning management system. We host that through an organization that we're deeply connected to, ProAct, and they're about community service and breaking cycles of poverty and racism. I live here in Central Indiana, and we're partnered with the local chapter here to provide our Little Allies book. We donate 100% of the proceeds to them. So just all that to say, really incredible partner that we have that hosts our learning management system, because we feel strongly in partnering with organizations that have a similar vision to us. And just grabbing some screenshots here, there's a dashboard. So the cool thing, if you have your own LMS, we can provide the content and just quickly share via Google Drive or Dropbox or however you like to share. But if you want access to our LMS or want to look for best practices on how an LMS could really support and enhance this learning, one, you want to have metrics and reporting. So we have dashboards where leaders can actually run reports to see how many people on their team have completed the different exercises. You also get a badge, and at the end of the course, we have a certificate as well for folks. And then you can do a content view. So like I said, choose your own adventure. We highly encourage folks start with the intro video just so they get a lay of the land with the course. And then they can take deep dives into any of the topics. And again, each video is about 5-ish minutes. Some are a little longer, some are a little shorter. And each one has a reflection activity and resources to go with it. And then as you get into a module, we have closed captions on all. We have video as well as slide reinforcement. We have a workbook that you can access. And then again, you can track your progress through the program. So all that to say, you can absolutely host on your own LMS. We provide the MP4 files and PDF files that are easy to transfer to nearly any LMS that we've worked with clients, but we can also host it inside ours. And we would just say, the 3 things that make an LMS really enhance the experience of this program is 1, metrics and tracking. So you got to have some reporting so you can hold people accountable. 2, badging and certificates. It's really big. If I spend time, like LinkedIn Learning, I'm spending some time training myself right now. Every time I complete a course, it puts it in my profile, which kind of makes it really fun for me to like an incentive. Same goes for this kind of program. I want an incentive that I completed the course. So we highly recommend you have badging and certificates. And then have a chat function or discussion board. So there's a discussion board where you can go in and ask us anything. So my team moderates that. They're in there every day, checking that out. So we can always answer questions. Or if you're doing this in a corporate setting, you can always have a moderator checking the chat as well. Best practices in addition to those on the LMS, we're seeing overwhelmingly with organizations we're working with that we got to reach what I call the magic middle. The middle manager overwhelmingly is white, straight male. I just did a focus group this morning, so it's fresh in my mind. And what they shared with me is I do not feel comfortable talking about diversity because people are going to look at me like, what does he know? And even though they're doing the work, they're afraid. And this is a really big problem. If 2/3 of our management is not able to engage in this work, there's no way we're going to make that cultural shift for DEI. So really, really incentivizing, setting the expectation that this is a part of being a people leader at our organization, we see as critically important to getting traction this year. It starts the conversation when I say majority group, I use that phrase a lot in our courses is folks that identify as white, straight, male, cisgender, able-bodied. Those folks a lot of times feel very removed because they don't consider themselves to have a dimension of diversity. And so we talk about it more broadly so that folks can come into the conversation. And there's this nuanced balance of helping people feel comfortable while also pressuring them to do better. And so that's really what we try to strike a balance of is yes, we meet people where they're at, and we have an expectation that you will do things differently as a result of what you're learning. You can't just go back to status quo because status quo is the enemy of diversity. And it reinforces existing training. Most organizations we work with already have training. Yeah, of course you do. But just like leadership training, you don't just do it once and then sit it on the shelf, right? It's not a one and done. It's not a check the box. This is something you have to keep doing. And folks need reinforcement. So a lot of times what people will say is, hey, I'd seen these concepts before. I knew what psychological safety was before, but I didn't know how to do it. Okay. And so the what and the how is what's missing with learning right now. So the how, really tangibly using scenarios, examples, talk tracks. That's what people are really hungry for. And it impacts what people are already learning. So you have to apply. As adults, we learn by application. And so if we're not unpacking live what we're learning, we risk, it being obsolete, it just kind of going away, just like any habit. It's easy to lose. So you got to keep it in the forefront of your brain and keep practicing it. And then just leveraging resources to continue to support folks. One thing that we're seeing is a best practice some of our clients are doing, kind of not to make light of DEI, but making it fun, making it, one of my clients calls it snackable. So every team meeting we have a 5-minute diversity moment. And that might mean everyone watches a video together and talks about it or listens to a podcast or looks at a meme or whatever it is, but it's embedded in our workplace culture and we're talking about it in a fun way because sometimes these topics can feel very heavy and overwhelming. So how do you make it real and interesting for people while also honoring that there is pain associated with the experiences of folks that have been marginalized. So that's really striking that balance, I think, is really important and something that we really tried to do. Although, just like everyone else, I'm an ally in training, so I've got more to learn, just like we all do. The learning is never done, which is part of the fun and also part of the challenge with it. Some tools we want to offer for you making the time today. Catherine put this together, our global diversity calendar, and you've probably seen quite a few versions of these. Catherine will share this one in the chat so you can download it and share. What we struggled with, we saw a lot of versions and it was like, but what do I do to celebrate this? So it's actually hyperlinked to an article. So you can kind of look through because diversity shouldn't just be, Black History Month, Women's History Month, celebrate diversity months in April. How do you have this conversation holistically year round in a relevant way? And so those articles, those resources help guide more context behind Juneteenth, for example, or Loving Day, or some of the things you might not be as familiar with, and also the importance of things like celebrating Pride Month year round, how to have conversations about disability at different points of the year. So really from a lot of different aspects of diversity, we have content there. That's a freebie for joining today. as well as a full resources list. So we started developing this early last year, and we've added, I think, 2 or 3 pages to this. So I'm always reading, finding new podcasts. So all the ones that have been helpful to our growth, and helped me over these 7 years to get more well-versed as an ally, another free resource for attending today. And if you have additions, we ask you to submit those, and we are adding client suggestions, organization suggestions all the time. So we still have a good 10 minutes for any questions that you have. I'd love to open it up for other best practices, other feedback that you're seeing. We've got a poll just to kind of touch base. I'd love to know where you're at on your DEI training journey. Do you feel your organization needs additional training to learn or submit these learning objectives? So if you want to just put yes or no there. Catherine shared both of those resources in the chat. We'll also do a quick follow-up. We're recording this session, so if you missed part of it or want to share with your colleagues, we'll also get the recording to you later today, as well as these additional resources. I think got 18 of the 30, so about 60%. We'll give you another 10 seconds or so. All right, 10 count.
Hey, Julie.
Yeah.
One other thing I think might be useful to share about is kind of best practices, how other clients in the past with previous iterations of this program have incorporated live sessions throughout a year or a cohort.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Catherine. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, one of the things is people with remote learning, right? People still want that engagement. They still want to ask questions. They still want to attend things like that. So we have coaching packages that we also offer to the course, so that some of our clients are like quarterly or monthly, depending on the cadence of the program, the expectations. And we do a quick survey to garner what topics they want to learn more about and what their learning journey has been like. And then we tailor those coaching sessions to the actual subjects and content and scenarios that are most relevant to that group. A great example. Those are really fun because, I say ask, just like today, ask me anything. We by no means have all the answers, but when people don't feel comfortable asking that, maybe if their manager are not sure where to go in their organization, those can be really helpful places for people to grow and learn. So overwhelmingly, yes, I hear you. And that is, I think, the question I get asked a lot is like, who's doing this really well? Who's got DEI figured out? Where's the gold star? There's organizations that are making a lot of progress. Absolutely. We work with JP Morgan Chase, for example. I think they do some really great things, but they're still not at the representation levels that they need to be at, right? Salesforce, we've worked with them over the years. Great focus on this, lots of engagement, lots of activity. Still, their representation, if you're looking at representation, they're probably doing okay in the inclusion piece, but maybe not so well in the diversity piece. And so I say all that because I don't think anyone has this figured out. And 80% of the journey is education, training, and awareness. And unfortunately, they're still here. We're still here in 2022, which if you would have told me 2015 when I started this business, I'd still be talking about these things. I don't know if I believe you, but it is still where we're at. So pulling people along. Also, and thanks, Shalise, yes, helping high schools catch everyone early. That is something that we're really passionate about with the Little Allies. So we're actually doing a lot of work on allyship at home and active allyship, not just in our professional lives, but personal lives, how to have these conversations with kids. Little known fact, bias is pretty well cemented at age 12. Right. So think for anyone that's a caregiver or has little people in your life. I mean, I have a 7-year-old. It's just unbelievable. We just watched the movie, I said, Encanto last night. And it's so funny as she's watching it, she's a white girl and she's watching it like, these people are white too, Mom. I'm like, no, they are brown. They are from Colombia. But she, it's so interesting how she does see difference and doesn't judge difference yet, but she will learn to do that through the course of her lived experiences. We absolutely have to start this conversation way earlier. And most parents are very fearful. We want to shield our children. We want to protect them. Well, that's not really fair because some kids don't get that choice, right? That's kind of our privilege talking if we don't feel like we have to, but we need tools, we need information. So more to come on that, but great point. Thanks for sharing that in the chat. I'd love, as we're wrapping up, we just have a few minutes. Any questions I didn't get to? I'd love for folks, come on and share, one thing you're taking away or ideas on how to share some of these topics or questions back with your work teams. We'll certainly share those resources with you, the resource list, the calendar, the recording. So you'll have plenty of tools to take back. But let us know, what else are you taking away? Oh, Kelly, thanks. Is anyone having any success with employee focus groups? Our DNI council is wanting to form small groups of like-minded employees, LGBT, minority, age-based. I love that, Kelly. Great question to the group. And when you say focus groups, you mean employee or resource groups?
Yes, I do. Yeah, we have a survey that we're ready to deploy to our employees, and then we have the blessing of our executive team to at least form two support groups. So yeah,
That's
that's
great.
resource groups. Yeah. So, but we
We've
just don't know much about it. We just wanted to know if there were any best practices or anything
yeah.
anyone could share.
Yeah. We've got a blog on that, a short read on that. So I know Catherine can share that in the chat.
Great.
Focus groups are really for education and awareness. The DEI, the diversity councils are more about leadership and policy and systems. So I've seen that go wrong where people blur the two. And we always recommend building it from the bottom up. So ideally, if you have LGBT employees building that group or women building the group, people of color, whatever dimensions you choose to focus on. But having goals and senior leadership engagement as well, because if we don't have goals and resources, I mean, money for these things too. Sometimes organizations forget that. It's like, oh, we'll just figure it out. Like, no, we wouldn't do that with anything important in business. Why would we do that with diversity, not fund it? So lots of ideas there. Scott had, what metrics do you look at to evaluate DEI progress and success? Got an article on that too, Scott. Yeah, measurement's really important. Leading and lagging indicators. So a lot of organizations measure representation because it's pretty easy to pull from your HRIS and get the race and gender numbers. I would argue measuring the inclusion factors are way more important. Representation is a lagging factor. So adding surveys to your employee engagement, having pulse surveys around inclusive leadership behavior, and having competencies for your leaders based on inclusion. Deloitte has a really good inclusive traits model that we use in our program. But there's lots of different competencies out there. And so when you start measuring performance of folks based on inclusion, that really starts to shift behavior pretty quickly because people realize this is part of my job. And unfortunately, people don't take it as seriously when they think their work is more important and this is just a side thing. And unfortunately, that perception is very much alive and well. Definitely taking away the bite-sized strategy, even from the perspective of headway of the affinity group is making. Yeah, and Alice, I just add to that too. Employee resource groups, if you've had folks that have been leading these groups for a while, they're really exhausted. They need tools, they need resources, they want development. So one of the things our clients have been doing is providing developmental sessions and experiences with us or with other thought leaders and saying, hey, this is your reward. Thank you for putting in the time and effort to the ERG. Now you get some time to learn some skills or to celebrate or have an opportunity to have an experience because you've been so helpful with this. So a couple articles. Thanks, Catherine, for sharing those there. Other questions, other ahas, commitments you're taking away? Just wanted to share, last thing I wanted to share was connect. Catherine on my team is happy to walk through the program in more depth. She can schedule a quick 20, 30-minute call with you just to see what this could look like at your organization. So we have tiered pricing. So if you have, it's $497 a learner, but if you have 10 or more, we do discounts and we do bulk discounts for 100 employees or less or more. It's kind of small business versus more corporate. And again, you can host on your own LMS or host on ours. It's pretty seamless, plug and play. And you get all the tools and resources as a result of this. So if you have questions on pricing, what, want to get into the system and see it a little bit, just send Catherine a note. She would be happy to schedule time with you or to provide additional content as well. Well, thank you, everybody. I want to be mindful of time. Time is a priority. We got through a lot in 45 minutes. Thank you for being with us. I'm so thankful. You saw an opportunity to learn and share your experiences with us. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.